South Africa appears to be a promising African country, but it is far from it. The South African society has been afflicted by large splits, and this ethnic disparity has caused two very different countries to exist in one due to rapid economic decline and extreme inequality throughout its history. Basically, if you come from a historically black ethnic group, you live in a different version of South Africa from those of white ethnicity. With discontent on the rise in South Africa, is revolution or civil war the Rainbow Nation's future? According to the Institute of Risk Management in South Africa risks becoming a failed state if its lack of decisive, ethical, and brave leadership continues and no action is made to boost economic growth and address high levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Complete economic collapse is almost certain if South Africa continues to endure a breakdown of ethical and legal standards, uncontrollable public turmoil, and a breakdown of the rule of law. To address the country's rising issues, government and private sector leaders must create and implement risk mitigation plans as soon as possible. While progress has been made, such as increasing independent power producers' electricity generation, there are still sporadic blackouts that discourage investment. In his State of the Nation speech in February, Ramaphosa reaffirmed his commitment to reform by selecting veteran mining executive Sipho Nkosi as the head of a team tasked with reducing business-stifling regulations. The president's promises to establish a more market-friendly economy were built on the finance minister's February 23 budget, which slashed the corporate tax rate by 1.27%. 2022 did not take off well in South Africa. A suspected arson attack on the parliament buildings in Cape Town occurred. The first tranche of the Zondo Commission's state capture report was released, painting a damning picture of the ANC and the government it leads. The ANC's 110th anniversary celebrations survived failed attempts to destabilize President Ramaphosa, and a senior member of his executive published a scathing and insulting attack on the Constitution and the judiciary. Following deadly and destructive Zuma riots on July 2021, a seemingly never-ending stream of corruption reports and governance failures, record-high unemployment, and a continued slide down in just about every socio-economic index in the public domain, it was clear that the year ahead would present South Africa with numerous challenges. As one might imagine, the commentariat is having a field day, exaggerating the bad news and anticipating more misery in the next year. We looked through the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report 2022 in search of some solace, but none was found. The top 5 risks for South Africa, according to the 12,000 leaders that participated in the World Economic Forum Risk Perception Survey were long-term economic stagnation, job and livelihood issues, state breakdown, public infrastructure failure, and illicit economic activity proliferation. As difficult as it is to accept, the signals have all been present for some time, but the one that attracts attention is the threat of state collapse. State failure. What does it say about the political landscape at the start of 2022 if 12,000 leaders from the world's industry, academia, government, and media feel South Africa is actually at risk of state collapse? Several study papers, judicial panels, and published work by numerous analysts have examined how we got here. Respected critics believe South Africa has evolved into this, and if they are correct, they will behave accordingly. On May 10, 1994, about 28 years ago, international leaders gathered in the amphitheater of the Union Buildings in Pretoria to witness Nelson Mandela's inauguration as South Africa's first democratically elected president. Everything looked feasible that day. Healing, rejecting a divided past, and constructing a new nation founded on human rights, equality before the law, democracy, and good governance, and being a force for good in Africa and the globe. We forget, or many people are too young to remember, how dangerous the South African state was in the 1980s. There was one constant among the violence, uncertainty, confusion, and threats that characterized South Africa's politics in the 1980s: the people of South Africa. It was well understood by the apartheid authorities of the period, as well as the exiled ANC and other liberation forces. They were well aware that neither side could or would win a military victory, and that the people of this country want a peaceful political solution with a genuine, democratically elected government. While armed factions continue to drum up support for their cause, the vast majority of the populace desired peace, stability, reconciliation, and a democratic future that they believed was within reach. They were correct, as it turned out. On May 10, 1994, they were proven correct when Nelson Mandela took the oath of office. The apartheid was not just a disaster for South Africa, but morally evil. Diversity stunted South African growth. This is basically saying that diversity is bad, which from a North American perspective is a very controversial thing to say. But the difference between North American and African diversity is that most, about 85% of North Americans willingly, either left their home or had ancestors leave their homeland to live in this new land. It was a choice. And North American society has only existed for less than 400 years, compared to African civilizations, which have existed for thousands of years. That's thousands of years of rivalries, as well as unique cultures, languages, and rituals. These groups developed naturally along geographic boundaries, as all other groups do. Then comes along a random group of outsiders who tells these different people and groups they are now supposed to be part of the same nation, and I hope you can see the problem with this type of diversity as opposed to the North American kind. This seems to be the genesis of most of South Africa's predicaments. Today, tensions are rising as the country's leaders struggle to deal with the coming tragedy. The African superpower has been devastated by a decade of declining economic indicators. South Africa is plunging farther and deeper into the mire, with over 29% unemployment and staggering levels of violent crime. To make matters worse, the country's once reliable and inexpensive power has become the single greatest economic threat. For months, Eskom, the state-owned power utility, has fought to keep the lights on as one plant failure after another has rendered the electrical infrastructure prohibitively expensive and unstable. To avoid total system failure, Eskom authorities have imposed forced blackouts, which have harmed the economy as businesses and households race for more expensive backup solutions like diesel generators or risk remaining in the dark. Eskom was forced to cut so much power from the grid on December 2021 that even key mining operations in the country were momentarily halted, affecting the country's most important sector. Pretoria has thrown billions of dollars at the problem in the midst of the outages, but to little result. This is because building new plants and fixing the country's aging infrastructure would take years, and South Africa's struggle to keep the lights on will continue to hurt the economy for the foreseeable future. If things don't turn around fast for South Africa, investment-grade fund managers will be forced to sell their South African assets, and others would reconsider their positions in the country. This will just increase the country's already significant investment outflows. Eskom's power problems have swallowed up billions of dollars and a lot of attention from the government. Much of this money has been borrowed, which will increase the burden on taxpayers in the coming years as the true costs of debt service are realized. Indeed, huge resources that could have been used to address the country's many fundamental problems have been diverted to putting out Eskom's big fire. South Africa's infrastructure, from roads and bridges to rail and the water system, is deteriorating. In reality, the failing water infrastructure has aggravated historic level droughts in 2019, increasing the likelihood of severe future water crises. However, South Africa's long-ruling African National Congress is as split as ever. Deep factions within the party are generally split between President Ramaphosa's reform wing and the populist wing originally led by his predecessor, Jacob Zuma. The challenge for Mr. Ramaphosa and his friends is that they only have a precarious grasp on the ANC, despite being the reason for the party's narrow escape from historic defeat in the 2019 national elections after years of dismal Zuma governance. Indeed, the Zuma side is largely to blame for South Africa's dire predicament, having spent much of the previous decade plundering rather than governing. Despite this, they have retained crucial posts in the present government and dedicate much of their time to sabotaging economic change and attempting to depose Mr. Ramaphosa. Internal squabbles within the ANC have stalled important economic reforms, triggering outbursts of fury from leaders. While many people can see the short-term implications, the long-term consequences for South Africa are less clear. First, the country's drab economy, which has been plagued by recession in recent quarters, is expected to grow at a slow pace for the foreseeable future. This will make it even more difficult for Pretoria to escape the potential financial trap it has created, as more money will be spent on debt servicing rather than new roads, health and education, law enforcement, and other priorities. To make matters worse, the country's dismal and persistent unemployment situation will serve as a stark reminder to millions of destitute South Africans functioning in the perilous black market economy that the country is divided into haves and have-nots. As a result of rising crime, slow economic growth, and crumbling infrastructure, the cost of living and doing business in South Africa will rise. This will be unacceptable for the country's high net worth and skilled individuals. Indeed, evidence reveals that the emigration of the country's most productive citizens has increased in recent years, with data indicating that the majority will never return. This will deprive South Africa of its best and brightest, affecting vital future areas such as high-tech, research, and medicine disproportionately. As the wealthiest and most mobile members of South African society leave for sunny and safer seas, budgetary gaps will grow. South Africa is in a sad state for a country that began with such promise following the end of apartheid in 1994. However, as political infighting and Eskom's woes persist, South Africa's chances of stopping the rot will grow increasingly difficult in the years ahead. However, South Africa can bounce back from this current position if it strategizes and takes appropriate measures to tackle its political, racial, and power issues, amongst others. South Africa and Nigeria are the African countries that most other African countries are looking to emulate. So, Africa would not like to see South Africa fall. What measures do you think the South African government and the people of South Africa can put in place to save their country? Propose your solutions in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and also don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Once you are subscribed, you're officially a tourister and part of our community of touristers here on The New Tourist. Thanks for watching and see you in another edition.